thank you so much for tuning in. I am Frank Schumpert, your host, and you are listening to the Empires of History podcast, the Ottoman series, Episode 4, Pirates and Goodbye Orhan. If you are new to Empires, I thank you for stopping by. If you are a returning listener, many thanks as well. I thank you also for subscribing on iTunes and visiting the show's website at, all one word, empiresofhistorypodcast.blueberry.net. That last part is spelled BLUBRRY.net, where you can comment and subscribe. I'd like to announce that after receiving valuable feedback, I have decided to work towards getting Empires up and going on Spotify and Stitcher. Many thanks to listener Brooks Hauser for this suggestion. Since I am stuck in the Apple ecosystem, I had no idea that Android listeners found it difficult to listen to Empires, and I am hoping to rectify the problem very soon. If you feel I can improve the show, please feel free to send me your feedback to empiresofhistorypodcast@gmail.com. Interested in supporting the show? How about leaving me a review on iTunes? It would greatly help out, and I'd certainly appreciate it. You can also email me with a real estate referral, of which I'd be eternally grateful. With that out of the way, let's jump right in. Previously in Episode 3, by 1357, the Ottomans were firmly established in the erstwhile Byzantine province of Thrace, with the important fortress of Gallipoli commanding the Dardanelles Straits. Sultan Orhan, headquartered in Bursa, had sent his spies infiltrating the surrounding territories of northern Thrace and Macedonia, while Ottoman raiders probed their way deep into Bulgaria and Serbia, causing all manner of havoc. The Byzantine Empire, if indeed the term empire could still be applied, was a beaten and spent force. The Byzantines would pose no obstacle to Ottoman expansion in any significant way. The emperor's territories had shrunk to the great city itself on the Golden Horn, save a few footholds here and there along the Greek archipelago. Indeed, the Byzantine emperor, John V, vainly appealed to his fellow Christians, the Catholics, for aid against the Ottomans. All of his efforts were rebuffed, and when he came crawling to the Pope begging for aid, anything to help stop the Ottomans, the emperor agreed to accept the supremacy of the Pope in exchange for military aid that never materialized, a move that pissed off the Orthodox citizenry of Constantinople something fierce. The kingdoms and despots of Bulgaria, Serbia, and Greater Macedonia didn't exactly present a united front against the Turks either. In what historians would subsequently come to call the Ottoman-Balkan Wars, was broken up into the Ottoman-Bulgarian Wars, Ottoman-Serbian Wars, etc., etc., would represent a larger, long-term plan of the sultans to conquer the whole of the region. There is certainly no small amount of controversy surrounding the whole, quote, was it a planned invasion from the start to conquer the whole world, or was it something that just kind of happened as the Ottomans flowed into natural geographic constraints? I plan on doing a special podcast in the future where I will attempt to conduct an offensive realist assessment of the Ottoman Empire's wars of expansion to see if we can gain a new perspective. But that is a podcast for the future. Also, before we get much further, I did promise to do a brief bio on John Cantazuzene, a very unique and fascinating figure of Byzantine history. I wanted to keep the focus on the Ottomans as much as possible. However, there are certain historical figures that jump out from the pages begging for a voice. Cantazuzene was born in the year 1292. His father was an old imperial favorite of the court at Constantinople, and was appointed governor of the province of Morea by the emperor. Cantazuzene received a classical education in arithmetic, languages, and theology, as well as the arts of war from a young age. It should be noted here that there is a discrepancy in the sources. Some say it was his father who guided and mentored the boy throughout his life. Others actually claim his father died shortly after his birth. As with most individuals associated with the imperial court, Cantazuzene was related to the reigning imperial family through cousins and second cousins, of cousins and more cousins. This link was enough for him to form a lifelong friendship with the future Emperor Andronicus III. Fast forward to 1328, and Andronicus III assumed the throne and elevated his bestie to the rank of Grand Domestic, a place which put him in charge of the day-to-day governance of the vast and confusing Byzantine bureaucracy. It is sure worth mentioning here, and indeed this seems to be a disease picked up by the Ottoman Empire after they had taken over, that the further one rose in the imperial court, the more one's political enemies seemed to multiply, a fact I'm sure poor Cantazuzene bitterly reflected upon during his lifetime. Remember those cousins of cousins and second and third and forgotten cousins, all of them somehow related to the imperial throne? Well, they had their feelings hurt whenever someone, anyone really other than themselves, glowed under imperial favoritism, and they were ready to make trouble for, plot against, and assassinate said favorite. When Emperor Andronicus III died, he left his 9-year-old son, the future John V, as successor, with Cantazuzene as his imperial protector or regent. The boy's mother, the Empress Anna, and the Orthodox Patriarch John Kalakalas, and a high-ranking general named Alexos, soon conspired to bring Cantazuzene down. I guess this conspiracy and the backstabbing and eye-gouging world of the Byzantines wasn't a question of if, but of when. The when came in the early 1340s. I couldn't pin down an exact date here, when Cantazuzene was leading a military campaign away from the capital. The plotters banded together and attacked Cantazuzene's family members, killing some, exiling others, and stealing their land and possessions. Cantazuzene learned of the plotters' actions while leading his army through northern Thrace, and soon his troops proclaimed him emperor. If this were a Byzantine history podcast, and there is already an incredible such podcast, The History of Byzantium by Robin Pearson, which you can find on iTunes, then this would be the part where we talked about the Byzantine civil wars of the 1370s. But our focus is on the Ottomans, whom will benefit greatly from the fragmentation of the Byzantine Empire. As we heard in Episode 3, Cantazuzene wasn't strong enough to fight off the imperial plotters on his own, so he turned to the Ottomans for help. This he did by cementing an alliance by the marriage of his daughter Theodora to Orhan, and the Sultan subsequently sending troops into Europe to aid Cantazuzene. With the Sultan's help, Cantazuzene was able to march directly on Constantinople and oust Anna and the Patriarch. The end of Cantazuzene's story came a few years later. He didn't have long to enjoy his position of emperor of the declining Byzantine Empire. The imperial court were dismayed at his alliance with the Ottomans and sought to undermine him at every turn. When the Ottomans occupied Gallipoli and overran all of Thrace, their dismay morphed into boiling rage against Cantazuzene, as the chickens of the Ottoman alliance came home to roost. Cantazuzene, now acting out of desperation when he realized that the Ottomans were intent on conquering all of Thrace, he turned for military aid to Serbia and Bulgaria. However, his alliance with the Ottomans would prove too much a blight on his character even here, as the leaders of the respective countries accused Cantazuzene of secretly planning to hand the whole of the Balkans over to the Ottomans. Cantazuzene eventually abdicated the throne sometime between 1352 and 1354, after the now fully grown to adulthood man John V besieged his palace. He was allowed to step down, having escaped the usual fate of Byzantine emperors, who normally would have had their eyes gouged out. He retired to a monastery where he produced a literary history of the Byzantine Empire from roughly 1320 to 1356, called simply History, long regarded by historians as pure propaganda to justify the decisions he made as emperor. But nonetheless, it is still regarded as fun and easy read to anyone who's interested. If this were a Transformers cartoon, then we are about to do a scene switch from the Autobots, the Byzantines, to the Decepticons, the Ottomans. Cue cool music and icon flipping. After the abdication of Cantazuzene, the Ottomans tightened their grip on the Byzantine Emperor, John V. In 1357, Sultan Orhan's son, Ali, who was the result of the marriage between the Byzantine princess Theodora and Orhan, was captured by pirates. The pirates held the boy in a fortress and demanded a huge ransom for his safe return. Sultan Orhan, who by all accounts suggested he cared deeply for his children, promptly ordered the Emperor John V to mount a rescue effort. And yes, you heard that right. He ordered the emperor to not only eat the cost of a rescue, but lead it in person himself. John V, though, it certainly galled him, had little choice. Constantinople was surrounded, and he couldn't risk the city being blockaded by the Ottomans this early in his reign. Like a compliant vassal, the emperor set out with a force of men and naval ships south of the Dardanelles to fight the pirates and besiege their fortress. When I researched this event, I couldn't help but wonder if Orhan chuckled a bit as the emperor set out with what was left of Byzantine's military force to expend time, money, and energy rescuing his son, as the Sultan, meanwhile, led his Ottoman army into the rest of Thrace to stir up trouble and grab more land for himself. The troops and sailors under John V, however, weren't chuckling. One can imagine how the conversation went amongst the rank-and-file enlisted men. What's this, you say? We're going south of the Dardanelles to rescue an Ottoman prince? Why doesn't the Sultan do this himself? We're off on a fool's errand while the Ottoman military is raiding deep into Bulgaria and assimilating Thrace. What exactly is the emperor thinking? Is he a traitor like that cursed Cantazuzene was? Before the expeditionary force even reached the pirates, a mutiny broke out. John V, probably rightly fearing assassination, left his fleet behind on a fast-moving squadron back north. It is said he came in person to the Sultan in tears, proclaiming the task he was assigned an impossible one. The matter was eventually settled, with the Ottomans paying half the ransom, the Byzantines the other half, and the boy, Ali, was safely returned to the Sultan. As penance for his failure to liberate Ali by force of arms, the Byzantine emperor was further humiliated by the Sultan, ordering him to turn his 10-year-old daughter over to the Ottoman court. When she was old enough, she would be wed to Ali, setting a very bad precedent for the imperial court in Constantinople, as pretty soon future lines of Ottoman sultans now had imperial Byzantine blood flowing in their veins and could stake out a claim on the city itself as rulers. In 1357, or it might have been 1358, Sultan Orhan's eldest son and heir apparent, Suleiman Pasha of Gallipoli fame, died after he fell from his horse. Suleiman and his horse are both buried in Bursa, where one can visit their memorial to this day. The kidnapping of Ali, though exploited politically and militarily as fully as possible by Orhan, had nonetheless caused him great anxiety about the boy's fate until he was finally back in Ottoman hands. Now in his early 80s, the unexpected death of his favorite and most capable son, Suleiman, seemed to have taken the wind out of the old and wise man, as he was said to proclaim that because of some great sin, God curse fathers as doomed to outlive their children. Just when it seems you are on top of the world, you often get reminded that you're only human after all. Proof positive that for all of us, no matter our station in life, death comes calling, and normally does so on a wave of bad news. Reflecting on his own mortality, Sultan Orhan retreated into the gardens of Bursa, his solitude broken only by the occasional company of mystics and clerics, where he reflected upon philosophy, art, and poetry. During his time of self-imposed seclusion, most of the empire's, are we calling it an empire now? Day-to-day activities were being carried out by capable administrators, competent army commanders, and at the top sat the soon-to-be next Sultan, Murad I. Murad seemed to be occupied on the European side of the empire, getting ready to gear up for a full-scale invasion of the remaining parts of Thrace and Macedonia. Though the Sultan was sick with grief and self-introspection, the empire's credentials as a powerful state were built on the promise of conquest. Conquest brought new warriors from within the world of Islam to fight for the Ottomans and replenish their ranks. It attracted men of talent, capabilities, and leadership qualities and independent thinking so prized by the sultans. Not to mention the geostrategic aspect to all of this, the Ottomans controlled about a quarter of the western portion of Anatolia up till this point. But their borders were unsecured by natural boundaries. And all throughout Anatolia, powerful Turkic beys were rising up to challenge Ottoman dominion. Indeed, Ottoman expansion into the interior of Anatolia and the wider Middle East can be best explained by religious motivations, coupled with the need to find secure natural boundaries and control the resources and trade routes. Thus, the last years of Sultan Orhan were spent in seclusion, while the empire was left in very capable hands. In 1362, he died of what was described as natural causes, surrounded by family and leading men of the empire. Sultan Orhan is rightfully remembered as one of the founding fathers of the Ottoman Empire. After having taken the reins from his father, Osman, in that smoky and mythic period of early Ottoman history, Orhan transformed the small and weak Turkish beylik into a challenger for the greatness of Byzantium. His armies marched and ravaged hundreds of miles from his initial starting position in Anatolia far into Bulgaria. The last of the Mongolian legacy in the Middle East, the Il Khanate, was snubbed without consequence, as Orhan became the first of the House of Osman to proclaim the title of Sultan, a Turkish title meaning one with authority over others. In my humble opinion, Sultan Orhan's greatest strength were his mental powers. Said to possess the gift of reading a man's character and capable of spinning intricate plots in which to ensnare his enemies, I could go on forever. But because of Orhan's shrewd political moves, most of the time he didn't even have to fight pitched battles to win strategic victories. Leaving behind him a strong and professional army, developed intelligence network, strong, centralized, and capable administration was to become the foundations of a great empire. In the end, it was the power of Orhan's vision and fierce intelligence that won him the legacy of being amongst the greatest of Ottoman sultans. I want to end today's episode by reflecting on the wider geostrategic victories and expansion of the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Orhan and the empire's future effect upon the history of the world. The coming of the Ottomans seemed to signal to Europe that its thousand-year gaze to the east in search of destiny and meaning were at an end. Ever since the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the world seemed to look towards the Byzantines for guidance, no doubt drawn towards the ancient and enigmatic empire's legacy of magic mixed with mysticism, mixed with the smoky rites of the Orthodox Church. At first it was the Crusades, drawn to protect the Holy Land, once belonged to the Christian Romans, then to prop up the ailing and dying Byzantines, then punitive military expeditions meant to open up the East to trade and bypass the Seljuk Turkic stranglehold on the terminal end of the Silk Road from China. With the arrival of the Ottomans and defeat after defeat of European armies sent to stop them, it is in this period that deep self-exploration came to nest in the European courts. During this time, the daring explorers, privateers, and mercantile political philosophies began to flourish. Enterprising individuals sold the royal courts visions of sailing around the dark continent of Africa and circumventing Muslim control of the Silk Road. Kings and queens dared to wonder what strange places lay beyond the Atlantic Ocean. The East, once the lands of the Roman emperors, Oriental queens, riches, and exotic places, were now a place populated by devils and disease. Even the Mediterranean was now a threatening edifice where squadrons of pirates might appear over the horizon to kidnap people and sell them into slavery. Indeed, entire books and dissertations have been written on this subject, as coastal communities and cities in south of France and Italy became depopulated. Thanks very much for listening to the show. I know that in episode 3 I promised that we were going to get into the military campaigns of Sultan Murad I. However, there was much more ground left to cover than I initially thought. I do promise, though, that next episode will be fun-filled as we cover Murad's military expeditions. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you also for supporting the show by subscribing and leaving a review on iTunes. And yes, hopefully, by next episode, everything will be ready for Stitcher and Spotify. Many thanks.